At its peak, Ponderosa Steakhouse had more than 700 restaurants. 700. It was, for a stretch of the early 1990s, the single largest steakhouse chain in the entire United States, bigger than Sizzler, bigger than Golden Corral, bigger than anyone. On a Friday night, in small towns and suburbs all across the American heartland, a Ponderosa parking lot was full. Families streamed in under the glowing sign, past the horse statues and the wagon wheels, and lined up with trays for a hot grilled steak, a baked potato the size of a fist, and a salad bar that seemed to go on forever. It was affordable. It was abundant. It was the taste of a good week, of a paycheck that stretched, of a whole family eating well together for not much money. Today, there are 15 Ponderosa steakhouses left in the United States, from more than 700 to 15. A collapse so total that most Americans, if you said the word Ponderosa to them now, would take a second to even place it. And then something would flicker. Some warm, buried memory of a childhood buffet, of a chocolate pudding and soft-serve sundae bar, of a place their family used to go, a place they haven't thought about in 20 years and had no idea was almost gone. This is the story of how that happened, and it's a strange one because Ponderosa wasn't killed by any single dramatic blow. There was no famous scandal, no leveraged buyout vulture, no one villain you can point to. Ponderosa died the way a whole species goes extinct, slowly from many directions at once, as the very world that created it quietly rearranged itself into a world with no room for it anymore. It's the story of the rise and fall of the great American family steakhouse buffet itself, an entire category of restaurant that once defined how millions of families ate out, and that has now nearly vanished from the earth. And to understand it, you have to start with a cowboy. Specifically, a television cowboy, because Ponderosa, improbably, wonderfully, was born out of a TV show. In the 1960s, America was obsessed with the Old West. The television airwaves were flooded with westerns, Gunsmoke, The Virginian, Rawhide, a whole galloping herd of cowboy dramas. And the biggest of them all, one of the most popular shows on television for years running, was Bonanza. It followed the Cartwright family, a widowed father and his 3 grown sons, running a sprawling cattle ranch in Nevada. And the name of that ranch, the setting of the whole beloved show, was the Ponderosa. Tens of millions of Americans tuned in every week to spend an hour on the Ponderosa Ranch. The word meant something warm to people. It meant family and horses and a hearty life on the open range and the reassuring rhythm of a show you watched with your parents every single week. Now here's where it gets interesting and a little bit crazy, because 2 different restaurants were born out of that one TV show, and they would spend the next 25 years at war before finally, bizarrely, being forced to marry. The first one came from inside the show itself. Dan Blocker was the actor who played Hoss Cartwright, the big, gentle, lovable middle son, one of the most popular characters on Bonanza. And in 1963, riding his fame from the show, Blocker lent his name to a chain of steakhouses. He called them Bonanza after the show that made him famous, and the first one opened in Westport, Connecticut. Blocker himself didn't run it for long. He soon sold his stake to 2 Texas brothers, Sam and Charles Wiley, who took the Bonanza name and started building it into a real chain. But the origin is pure. A beloved TV cowboy opened a cowboy steakhouse named after his cowboy show, and America, which loved the show, loved the restaurant too. And then, 2 years later, in 1965, in Kokomo, Indiana, 3 businessmen, Dan Lasseter, Norm Weiss, and Charles Klefts, looked at what Bonanza was doing and decided to do the same thing. But rather than buy a Bonanza franchise and join up, they built their own nearly identical competing version. Same Western theme, same limited menu of affordable steaks with potato and salad. Same everything, really. And for the name, they reached into the exact same TV show. But instead of taking the show's title, they took the name of the ranch itself. They called it Ponderosa. There's a detail about that founding worth pausing on, because it foreshadows a lot of what comes later. One of those 3 founders, Dan Lasseter, was a genuine wheeler dealer, a man with a nose for money and a taste for risk. He and his partners built Ponderosa fast and aggressively, and Lassiter made a fortune off it while still a young man. He would go on, in later years, to a life that had nothing to do with steakhouses and a great deal to do with fast horses and faster money. A colorful, controversial figure who eventually ran into serious legal trouble of his own far down the road. But that restless, aggressive, grow-at-all-costs energy was baked into Ponderosa from the very start. This was not a patient family business built to last for generations the way some of the great enduring chains were. It was a fast-moving money-making machine, built to expand as quickly as franchising would allow. And that DNA, grow fast, keep it cheap, push hard, shaped everything about how Ponderosa rose and, arguably, how it fell. So sit with how strange the whole setup is for a second. You now have two competing steakhouse chains, founded 2 years apart, both cashing in on the same hit television western. One is named after the show, the other is named after the ranch in the show. They offer an almost identical product, and they're spreading across the same Midwestern towns. It was as if two rival companies had both opened superhero-themed restaurants off the same movie, one called Batman's and one called Gotham's, and then set out to conquer the exact same territory. And conquer they tried. The competition between Ponderosa and Bonanza became genuinely, famously, wild. There are stories of the two chains actively sabotaging each other, stories of Bonanza management scrambling to block Ponderosa from expanding into their turf. A real, heated, sometimes almost comic rivalry between these two nearly twin cowboy steakhouses born of the same show, each convinced the other was a copycat, each racing to plant its flag in the next town first. Remember this rivalry. It matters enormously later, because the way it finally ends is one of the strangest turns in the whole story. But first, let's talk about why the concept worked so well, because it worked spectacularly, and understanding why is the key to understanding everything that came after. The genius of Ponderosa, and of Bonanza, and of the whole family steakhouse buffet category they helped invent, was that it cracked a very specific and very powerful problem. Here was the problem. How do you let an ordinary working family with kids eat out affordably and feel like they got a real treat, a real meal, real value, without it costing a fortune and without requiring a fancy sit-down restaurant? Their answer was brilliant in its simplicity. First, the fixed, low price. In the early days, a basic dinner at Ponderosa cost $1.39. $1.39. Even for the 1960s, that was almost unbelievably cheap for a steak dinner, and the price was the whole pitch. Dinner out for the whole family, for pocket change, no surprises. Parents loved it precisely because it was predictable and affordable. You knew, walking in, roughly what the night would cost, and you knew you could afford it, and that certainty was a gift to a family on a budget. How did they make the money work at a price that low? A few clever, unglamorous ways. The service was cafeteria style. You ordered and picked up your own food at a counter, which meant the restaurant needed far fewer waiters, which slashed labor costs. The menu was deliberately limited. A few steaks, potato, salad, roll, which kept the kitchen simple and fast and cheap to run. And the steaks themselves were, to be honest about it, lower-grade cuts of beef, tenderized with enzymes to make them palatable, which kept the food cost down. Ponderosa was so focused on controlling the cost of beef that the company eventually bought its own beef processing operation so it could supply its own restaurants and squeeze the margins even tighter. Every part of the machine was engineered around one goal: keep it cheap enough that a family could afford a night out and still make a profit. None of that, notice, was about being the best. It was about being the best value, which is a completely different thing. And it's worth understanding the distinction because it defines both Ponderosa's rise and its eventual vulnerability. A great steakhouse sells you the finest cut of beef money can buy and charges you accordingly. Ponderosa did the opposite. It figured out the cheapest cut of beef it could serve that people would still happily eat, and then built an entire national empire on the gap between that low cost and the affordable but slightly higher price. The whole business lived or died on that margin, on keeping the beef cheap and the operation lean. It was a triumph of engineering, of logistics, of ruthless cost control disguised as a warm family cowboy restaurant. And for a long time it worked beautifully because the customer didn't care that the steak was a lower grade. The customer cared that they got a steak dinner, out with their family, for a price they could afford. Ponderosa understood something deep about how most Americans actually eat and actually live, and it served that understanding for decades. And then, layered on top of that value, came the thing people actually remember, the thing that turned a cheap steak dinner into a genuine childhood memory, the buffet, the salad bar, the all-you-can-eat spread. Over the years, the family steakhouse buffet grew into a sprawling, abundant, glorious thing. Not just salad, but hot dishes, chicken, rolls, mac and cheese, and, gloriously for the kids, the dessert bar. The soft-serve ice cream machine you could work yourself. The pudding. The little bowls you could fill again and again. For a child in 1978, a Ponderosa was close to paradise because the fundamental rule of childhood eating, that there's a limit, that you can't just have more, was suspended. You could go back. You could get seconds and thirds and a second ice cream, and nobody stopped you because that was the whole deal. Picture the whole scene, the way a whole generation still can. You walk in and the room is warm and a little dim and dressed up like a cowboy dream. Wagon wheels mounted on the walls, horse statues, lantern-style lights, the staff in cowboy hats and red checkered shirts, maybe a mural of cattle on an open range. You get your tray, you slide it along the rail. Somebody behind the counter calls your steak, and it comes out sizzling on a hot plate with a foil-wrapped baked potato beside it. And you carry it, proud, a whole steak dinner that's yours. And then, you're released to the buffet. And for a kid, this is the main event. The salad bar stretching down the room, the sneeze guard you have to reach under, the tongs, the little ladles, the endless bins. You build a plate that's mostly croutons and shredded cheese and those bacon bits that aren't quite bacon. You circle back for the soft serve, pulling the handle and watching the ice cream coil down into the cone, or better, the bowl, so you can add the sprinkles and the chocolate sauce and the crushed cookies. Your parents let you. That's the miracle of it. On a night at Ponderosa, the answer to "can I have more" was yes, always yes. And there is a specific joy in that memory that anyone who lived it can still feel in their chest. Think about what that meant to the families who filled those parking lots. This was aspirational and accessible at the same time, which is a very hard combination to pull off. A steakhouse sounds fancy, sounds like a special occasion, sounds like something you save up for. But Ponderosa made the steakhouse democratic. It took the idea of going out for a steak dinner, an idea that used to belong to people with money, and it handed that idea to everybody, to the factory worker and the school teacher and the family with 4 kids and a tight budget. For a lot of Americans, a Ponderosa was where you went to celebrate. The good report card, the birthday, the team's winning season, the Friday at the end of a hard week. It was affordable enough to be frequent and nice enough to feel like an occasion, and living in that sweet spot between everyday and special is exactly why people loved it, and exactly why they remember it now with such a specific ache. And it grew and grew and grew. Ponderosa began franchising almost immediately in 1966, and the model spread like wildfire across the Midwest and beyond, then into Canada, hundreds of locations through the 1970s and into the 1980s. The rival Bonanza grew right alongside it, approaching 600 locations of its own. Between the two of them, these cowboy-themed, TV show-named dollar steak buffet houses became a genuine feature of the American landscape. The wagon wheels on the wall, the staff in cowboy hats and red checkered shirts, the chuck wagon buffet line, the whole warm, kitschy Western fantasy, planted in strip malls and on commercial strips in 1,000 ordinary American towns. By the early 1990s, Ponderosa stood at more than 700 restaurants, the largest steakhouse chain in the country. But even at that peak, cracks were already showing under the surface. And they were the kind of cracks that don't show up in a location count. Ponderosa struggled for years to hold on to stable leadership. It couldn't seem to keep a long-term CEO in the chair, cycling through management, never settling into the steady, patient, long-view stewardship that builds an enduring institution. And even as the restaurant count climbed, critics and customers were starting to notice that the dining rooms were looking dated, the menu tired, the whole concept a little stuck in the past. That's the treacherous thing about peaking. The number of locations is a lagging indicator. It tells you how well you did over the last decade, not how healthy you are right now. Ponderosa hit its all-time high in raw restaurant count at the exact moment its foundations were beginning to rot. The leadership unstable, the concept aging, the world shifting. The empire looked its biggest right as it began, invisibly, to die. And the fact that it was, by the numbers, the largest steakhouse chain in America made the coming fall all the more shocking because nobody standing in a packed Ponderosa parking lot in 1992 would have believed you if you'd told them that within 30 years there would be 15 left. That was the top. And from that peak, the long, slow, many-fronted decline began. And no single thing caused it, which is exactly what makes it such an instructive story. Because Ponderosa was killed by a whole changing world at once. Start with the first great wound, the one that struck at the very heart of what Ponderosa was. America's relationship with the buffet changed, and it changed in a way that turned the chain's greatest strength into a growing liability. The all-you-can-eat buffet was Ponderosa's magic, abundance, value, the joy of unlimited seconds. But two things happened to the buffet over the decades that quietly poisoned it. The first was health. Starting in the 1970s and accelerating through the 80s and 90s, America grew steadily more health conscious, more worried about fat and cholesterol and portion sizes and overeating. And the all-you-can-eat buffet is, almost by definition, a monument to overconsumption. The whole appeal, eat as much as you want, go back again and again, became, in a more calorie-anxious culture, faintly shameful. Something people started to feel a little guilty about, a little wary of. The buffet that had felt like generous abundance in 1975 started to feel like unhealthy excess by 1995. And Ponderosa, whose menu was built on steak and baked potatoes and a dessert bar, had very little to offer the growing number of Americans who now wanted something lighter, fresher, healthier. The culture moved toward salads and grilled chicken and portion control, and Ponderosa was standing there with an all-you-can-eat sundae bar. The second thing that happened to the buffet was scarier, and it did lasting damage to the entire category: food safety. When you think about what an all-you-can-eat buffet actually is, trays of food sitting out under heat lamps, served by the public itself, hundreds of strangers reaching over the same serving spoons and the same salad tongs, food held at temperature for hours, you start to see the problem. Around 1970, U.S. health authorities began systematically tracking outbreaks of foodborne illness, and the connection between self-serve buffets and contamination risk came into sharper and sharper public focus. And then came the outbreaks that made national news. Major buffet-style and family dining chains became the sources of highly publicized E. coli and hepatitis outbreaks. People got seriously sick. Some of it made headlines. And here's the cruel thing about fear, especially fear about food. It doesn't stay contained to the place where the problem actually happened. When a big buffet chain made the news for an outbreak, the damage wasn't just to that chain. It was to the whole idea of the buffet, because the customer standing at a salad bar can't tell one chain's food safety practices from another's. All they know is what they've absorbed from the news and the culture. That self-serve food can make you sick, that the salad bar might not be as clean as it looks, that the chicken under the heat lamp has been sitting there who knows how long. That vague, low-level dread attaches itself to every buffet everywhere, fair or not. And it works directly against the buffet's entire reason for existing. Because a buffet only works if the customer feels good about digging in, about piling the plate high, about going back for more. The moment a flicker of doubt enters, is this safe? Is this fresh? How many hands have been here? The magic curdles. The abundance that was the whole appeal starts to look like risk. Ponderosa didn't have to have a single outbreak of its own to be hurt by this. The fear was in the air, attached to the format itself, and Ponderosa was the format. The thing that made it special was slowly becoming the thing that made people uneasy. So the core concept was aging and, in some ways, curdling. And right at that vulnerable moment, the second great wound arrived, and it came from the strangest possible direction. Ponderosa was forced to marry its oldest enemy. Remember the wild rivalry between Ponderosa and Bonanza, the two nearly identical cowboy chains born of the same TV show that had spent 25 years fighting each other across the Midwest. In the late 1980s, a Texas-based conglomerate called Metromedia Restaurant Group went on a steakhouse buying spree. Metromedia already owned other casual dining brands, and in 1988 it bought Ponderosa. Then, in 1989, it bought Bonanza. And so, after a quarter-century of open war, the two bitter rivals suddenly found themselves owned by the very same company, forced under one corporate roof, eventually managed together as a single family of steakhouses. Now, on paper, on a spreadsheet, this might have looked smart. Combine the two biggest players in the category, eliminate the rivalry, pool the resources, dominate the market. In reality, it was a merger of two aging, struggling companies, and it mostly combined their problems rather than their strengths. Both chains, by the time of the merger, were carrying financial troubles and management troubles into it. And critically, this is a detail that says everything. Unlike most chains that use two names but keep them in separate regions, Ponderosa and Bonanza, because they'd grown up as independent rivals, often sat in the same towns, sometimes practically down the road from each other. So now, one company owned two nearly identical restaurant chains that were, in many places, directly competing with each other for the same customers. The company was, in effect, cannibalizing itself, two of its own brands splitting a shrinking market between them. And there's a deeper irony buried in that merger, one that gets at the whole tragedy of Ponderosa. For 25 years, the rivalry with Bonanza had been a source of energy. Competition, even a wild and petty competition, keeps a company sharp. It forces you to fight for every customer, to open in the best spots first, to keep your prices keen and your operation tight. The war between the two cowboy chains had, in a strange way, made both of them better and hungrier for a quarter of a century. And then the merger simply switched that engine off. Once the two rivals were owned by the same parent and managed as one family, there was no one left to race against, no enemy across the street to beat. The thing that had driven both companies to excel was gone, replaced by the slow, defensive, cost-cutting logic of a conglomerate managing a portfolio of tired brands. The forced marriage of the old enemies didn't create strength. It created a confused, doubled-up, self-competing giant, saddled with debt and aging restaurants, with the fight drained out of it, right as the whole buffet category was starting to lose its grip on the American imagination. The rivals had spent 25 years keeping each other alive. United under one owner, they began, together, to die. And the third great wound was underneath all of it, grinding away the entire time: the economics of cheap beef in a changing world. Ponderosa's whole promise was cheap steak. But beef is a commodity, and commodity prices swing, and a business built on selling steak as cheaply as humanly possible is brutally exposed to every rise in the price of cattle. When beef prices climbed, Ponderosa was trapped. It couldn't raise prices much because its entire identity and its entire customer base were built on being cheap, and its clientele was famously price-sensitive. These were people who came specifically because it was affordable, and who would simply stop coming if it wasn't. So a rise in beef prices squeezed the margins directly, with no easy way to pass the cost along. The company was permanently pinned between the cost of its main ingredient and the thriftiness of its own customers, and every swing in the cattle market threatened to erase what little profit the low-price model made. Put those three wounds together, and you have a business in a slow, inescapable vice. The buffet concept was aging, going out of fashion, and quietly tainted by health and safety fears. The company had doubled up on itself in a defensive merger of two struggling rivals, and the underlying economics of cheap beef left no room to breathe. None of these was a dramatic, sudden death blow. All of them, together, over years, were fatal. And then the broader world of dining moved on without it, which was the final, quiet betrayal. The America that had created Ponderosa, an America of one-income families looking for an affordable Friday night outing, of a culture that saw a big, cheap steak buffet as a genuine treat. That America was changing. Casual dining exploded with new competition. The Applebee's and Chili's and Outback Steakhouses of the world, offering table service and a livelier atmosphere and a more modern experience, pulling away the families who wanted a real sit-down night out. From the other direction, fast casual and fast food got better and cheaper, pulling away the families who just wanted to eat quick and cheap. And Ponderosa, sitting in the middle, not as nice as the casual dining chains, not as fast or cheap as fast food, built around a buffet concept people increasingly viewed with suspicion, found itself with fewer and fewer reasons for anyone to choose it. It had been the perfect answer to the question American families were asking in 1975. By 2005, they were asking completely different questions, and Ponderosa didn't have the answers. This is the trap that catches so many once great chains, and it's worth naming plainly because it's the quiet killer underneath the whole story, being stuck in the middle. For years, the middle was the best place to be. Ponderosa was more of a real meal than fast food and more affordable than a fancy steakhouse, and that middle ground was exactly where the great mass of American families lived. But the middle is a terrible place to be when the market pulls apart at both ends. And that's precisely what happened to American dining. One end raced toward experience and quality and atmosphere. The other end raced toward speed and convenience and rock-bottom price. And the middle, the plain, affordable, sit-down, all-purpose family restaurant, got hollowed out, squeezed from both sides, until there was almost nothing left standing there. Ponderosa didn't get beaten by one superior competitor. It got slowly abandoned as the ground it stood on simply eroded away beneath it, the customers drifting off in both directions to places that did one thing better than Ponderosa did anything. There was no dramatic defeat. There was just a long, quiet emptying out table by table, year by year. The numbers tell the decline with brutal clarity. More than 700 locations at the peak in the early 1990s, fewer than 400 by 2003. The restaurants closed and closed and closed quietly, one at a time, across the Midwest and the Rust Belt, where the chain had been strongest. And these closings hit hardest in exactly the kind of places that could least absorb the loss. The small towns and working-class suburbs where a Ponderosa hadn't just been a restaurant, but a gathering place. One of the few affordable sit-down options for miles, the spot for the church group and the retiree's breakfast and the kid's birthday. When the Ponderosa in a small town went dark, the town didn't just lose a steakhouse. It lost a little piece of its shared life, a place where people had gathered for decades, and often it wasn't replaced by anything at all. Just another empty building on the strip, the horse statues hauled away, the sign taken down, the salad bar sold for scrap. The corporate story limped along behind the closings, a familiar tale of decline. The parent company struggled for years. In 2008, hammered by the recession, which hit a cheap family steakhouse especially hard, because when money gets tight, eating out is the first thing families cut. The parent company filed for bankruptcy. It reorganized, re-emerged under a new name, and the shrunken chains kept getting passed along. Eventually, in 2017, what was left of Ponderosa and Bonanza was acquired by Fat Brands, a company that collects struggling restaurant brands and which has had plenty of turmoil of its own. Today, the two old rivals, Ponderosa and Bonanza, are managed together as essentially the same restaurant under two different names. The war between them not just ended but rendered meaningless. The two enemies now indistinguishable. Two labels on the same dwindling operation. And that operation, worldwide, is down to a few dozen locations, with just 15 Ponderosas left in the United States, the country where it once reigned as the largest steakhouse chain in the land. There's a bleak irony in that 2008 recession being the blow that finally broke the company's back, because a recession is exactly the moment a cheap family steakhouse should have shined. When money is tight, you'd think an affordable steak dinner would be precisely what struggling families reach for. But it doesn't work that way, and the reason reveals how far Ponderosa had already fallen. When families are truly squeezed, eating out at all is the first thing to go. Not traded down to a cheaper restaurant, but cut entirely, replaced by cooking at home. And the families who did still eat out had, by 2008, so many better options for their dollar that a tired buffet steakhouse wasn't the natural fallback anymore. The recession didn't kill a healthy company. It delivered the final push to a company that was already mortally wounded, already shrinking, already caught in the vice of an aging concept and a changed world. A strong Ponderosa might have weathered 2008. The Ponderosa that actually existed in 2008, doubled up with Bonanza, squeezed on beef, tainted by buffet fears, abandoned by a market that had moved on, simply couldn't. But here's the part that lingers, the part that makes this more than a business obituary. Those 15 surviving Ponderosas are not empty. They are, many of them, beloved. Genuinely, fiercely beloved by the people who still have one. There are servers who have worked at the same Ponderosa for 40 years, who know their regulars by name and know their orders before they sit down. There are customers who drive an hour, 2 hours from states away, past 100 other restaurants, specifically to eat at the last Ponderosa within reach, not because the steak is the best they can get, but because it's the steak they grew up on, at the place they grew up in, and eating it puts them back inside a memory they can't get anywhere else. When one of these last locations announces its closing, people show up in droves to say goodbye, lines out the door, grown adults getting emotional over a buffet, because it was never really about the buffet. It was about who they were with and when, and the version of their life that restaurant holds. Think about what a 40-year server actually represents. That's someone who started working at Ponderosa when it was a mighty empire, when the parking lot was full every night and there were 700 of them and the future looked endless. And that person has stood at the same counter in the same dining room for 4 decades, watching the crowds thin, watching the sister locations close one by one, watching the empire shrink to almost nothing around them, and has stayed, has kept bringing the steaks, kept knowing the regulars, kept the room warm for the people who still come. There's something quietly heroic in that, and something heartbreaking. These last Ponderosas survive not because of clever corporate strategy, but because of loyalty. The loyalty of the lifers who work there and the lifers who eat there. A small, stubborn community of people holding on to a thing they love long after the world decided it didn't need it. When a customer drives 2 hours for a Ponderosa steak, they're not being fooled about the quality. They know exactly what it is. They're driving for something the food only stands in for. Because that's the thing about Ponderosa, and it's the thing worth ending on. It was never a great restaurant, in the way a food critic means great. The steak was cheap and tenderized. The buffet was mass-produced. Nobody's writing poems about the cuisine. But it was a great institution, which is a completely different and in some ways more important thing. It was where a whole slice of America, the working and middle-class heartland, the families without much money and with a lot of love, got to feel for a couple of hours on a Friday night, prosperous and abundant and taken care of, got to pile a plate high and go back for more, got to sit together, all of them, over a real steak dinner they could actually afford in a warm room dressed up like a cowboy fantasy, and feel for a little while like life was good and there was plenty to go around. That feeling was the real product. The steak was just how they delivered it. And the reason 700 restaurants could shrink to 15 is that, slowly, over 40 years, America stopped being the country that needed that particular feeling delivered in that particular way. The families changed. The health worries grew. The buffet lost its innocence. The beef got expensive. The competition got slicker. The old rivals got mashed together and canceled each other out. And one by one, the parking lots emptied and the lights went off and the horse statues came down. Somewhere tonight, in one of the 15, the buffet is still warm. An older couple who have been coming for 50 years are sitting in their usual booth. A server who has known them for decades brings the steaks. Down the way, a family is letting their kids work the soft serve machine, watching them discover the same small, unlimited joy their own parents watched them discover a generation ago. The wagon wheels are still on the wall, the sign is still lit. And for one more night, in one of the last places on earth where you can still find it, the Ponderosa is exactly what it always was. Abundant, affordable, a little bit kitschy, and full of people who feel, for a couple of hours, like they've come home. Home to a time when a good life was a full plate and a full table and everybody you love in one warm room. There used to be more than 700 doors you could walk through to find that. Now there are 15. The buffet is still warm for now, but the lamps are burning low.